Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S exam prep. Welcome to the Hindu analysis. So first let's take a look at the topics we are going to discuss today. I have chosen three important columns for a detailed discussion which is more relevant for the mains exam, and we have few more articles that are very important for your prelims examination. So let us cover all these articles comprehensively and ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspapers again. If you are liking the initiative, do let us know by pressing the like button, share your comments once the live stream ends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. So let's begin with today's discussion by looking at the first article from page number 8. This column that you see here is written by the charge d'affaires in the Chinese embassy in New Delhi. It's a very interesting and a very unique article. It deals with India-China relations, of course. But usually we always read about tensions and rivalries between India and China. Right? In the last few years, especially as China has gotten more aggressive, it has displayed its expansionist behavior. Ties with India has naturally been affected because of our disputed border. So generally we read about India-China rivalry, tensions, conflicts, etc. But this article is a complete different approach that is providing for the India-China relations. The article mainly focuses on the opportunities available for India-China partnership. So I would like to take up this article and dive deep into it and also bring in many additional points to make it a more comprehensive discussion. Because in international relations, there can be a mains question which will focus not just on India-China conflict, right, and the tensions, but also on the opportunities available for cooperation and partnership. So this is something we need to examine in detail. The writer says that today the world is in a constant state of chaos and flux. The security situation around the world has become very unstable. And the writer is referring to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and as well as the new conflict which has broken out in West Asia. Right, the Israel-Hamas war threatens to spill over across the West Asia region, drawing many regional global powers into the conflict. We have the Ukraine war going on from almost 1.5 to 2 years right now. Plus, around the world there are many situations where you find wars, conflicts and instabilities to be present. Along with that, the world is facing a developmental crisis. It's not just a crisis with regard to peace and security in the world, but there is a crisis with regard to development and governance as well. So the writer is correctly pointing out that there is a global deficit in peace, security, development and governance. Essentially, the developed Western countries, which until now have dominated the international order, they have failed to provide for better global governance. That is the point the writer is trying to make. Because if you look at all the global multilateral institutions, be it United Nations, the WTO, the Climate Change Convention, right? Most of the institutions are dominated by the developed industrialized Western countries. And despite that, if today the world is in chaos, if there is no peace and stability in the world, if repeated conflicts are breaking out, and development and governance is being compromised around the world, if you are not effective in achieving our sustainable development goals, if you are not on track to meet our climate action targets in the Paris Agreement, right, that points to a major governance development deficit, right? The global economy is also in crisis mode in the last 1.5 years. So it points to the large failure of the developed Western countries in managing the international world order. So it's in this context that the writer is suggesting that there is a great opportunity for developing emerging economies like India and China. As two large Asian neighbors, both the countries have a tremendous opportunity to actually collaborate and work together. There are many common interests that are shared between India and China. So that is the whole focus of this article. Now let me take this discussion and make it a little more comprehensive by evaluating the civilizational relations shared between India and China. Since we are talking about the possibilities of cooperation between the two Asian powers, it is very important to examine the historical areas of cooperation between India and China, not just in modern times, but dating all the way back to the ancient times. Because both the Indian and Chinese civilizations, they have been ancient, progressive and thriving civilizations. Before all the external interference, especially the colonial interference from the European region, since centuries, since thousands of years, the Indian and Chinese civilizations were some of the most progressive and thriving civilizations in the world. Right? They had very stable, self-sufficient economies, very diverse culture, rich cultural history, along with scientific advancements, with very stable governance being provided across the region by tackling security issues and by driving trade and economic opportunities between the two civilizations and empires. So this relationship, this civilizational relationship dates back to more than 2000 years, to more than 2 millenniums. And of course there exists this historical foundation on which we can build today's relationship as well. In fact, many experts point out that both in India and China, we have a very poor understanding of each other. Today, be it the Indian government or the Chinese government, be it the people of India or the Chinese people, the media and the experts as well, we all have a very short-sighted understanding of each other. China looks at India as a third world country which is aligning with Western countries and acting as an irritant. India looks at China as an aggressive expansionist power which is constantly threatening our security interests, which is true to an extent as well, because the ideology of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, is rooted in Maoism, which promotes violent aggression. But despite the legitimate threat that China poses to India, there is actually a history behind India-China relations, a deep-rooted civilizational relationship, which can be tapped even today to make this relationship work. This could provide plenty of opportunities for both the sides to collaborate, because we've done it in the past. In the past, two large civilizations and empires have thrived together throughout centuries. So this is not the first time that two large countries are competing for influence and power in the region. It has existed before as well, and we had very good cordial relations, very good thriving relations, and the whole region was kept stable by the Indian and Chinese civilizations. So let's examine this in more detail. See, if you look at our civilizational thought, we have a lot of commonalities between us. In fact, Buddhism and Hinduism from India has had a deep-rooted influence on Chinese civilization as well. Buddhism in particular would travel from India to China, right? Even today, Buddhism is a major religion in China, right? If you look at China's religious spiritual practices, especially of its majority Han ethnic community, you find close linkages with Buddhist philosophies and with some connections with Hindu or Vedic civilization as well. So there is that religious, spiritual angle that binds India and China together. So if you look at our civilizational thought and philosophies, the Chinese people believe that the world should be fair, just, and we should strive towards achieving the common good of the entire world, of the entire humanity. Now this Chinese philosophy is very, very close and similar to our motto of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which has been the traditional ethos of ancient Indian philosophy. Right? This is something the Modi government also is championing, that the whole world is one community. We need to tackle all issues as one single source to ensure the betterment of humanity. So in our civilizational thought, there are opportunities available for us to come together, work together, and deal with the pressing issues of the world. Now, if you want more evidence of India-China civilizational ties, just take a look at how the Silk route of China and the spice route of India were interconnected. Centuries ago, right, China being the main producer of silk and India being the main producer of spices, they were both sought after civilizations and sought after markets by European colonial powers. Since centuries, the spice and silk route have been critical, not just for trade and economic opportunities, but also for exchange of culture and ideas. So Buddhism would travel from India and have a deep influence on China, which is seen even today, right? There are several thinkers who point out the connections between our spirituality, our religion, right, our cultural thought, and even in terms of civilizational development. If you look at martial arts in both the countries, right, there are a lot of things that bind us together. You can find those common traces even today. If you look at India's ancient epic treatises and mythological texts like Mahabharata, even Ramayana, Arthashastra, Chanakya's Arthashastra, they contain references to China, which indicate that there was a awareness of the people on both the sides. People on both the sides, the civilizations on both the sides, they were in touch, they were aware of each other, they were in contact with each other, maintaining a cordial relationship. The Nalanda University, one of the world's oldest universities, located in today's Bihar. Right, today we are trying to revive the Nalanda, the ancient Nalanda University. Back then, it was a major center of learning all across Asia. Nalanda University was a key center for Buddhist studies. And scholars and students from across Asia would come to Nalanda, from Japan to South Korea to China to Southeast Asia. Right, from all these Asian countries where Buddhism had traveled, scholars and students would come down to Nalanda, forming a close cultural people-to-people bond. Then look at the historical relationship that the Cholas had formed with the Song dynasty in China centuries ago. I hope you know that the Tamil dynasty, the Cholas, were predominantly a naval power. Right? The Cholas dominated large stretches of the Indian Ocean, from today's Sri Lanka to Maldives, stretching all the way till Southeast Asia. Right? The Cholas defeated the mighty Srivijaya Empire in a naval battle, in a legendary naval battle in today's Indonesia. From Sumatra to Bali, these parts of today's Indonesia came under the direct influence of the Cholas, including Sri Lanka and Maldives. So today, if you go across Southeast Asian countries, from Vietnam to Cambodia to Thailand to Malaysia, Singapore and Indonesia, you find very strong, deep-rooted Indian influences. There are strong Buddhist and Hindu influences in culture, festivals, in food as well, right? And the Cholas had formed this strong relationship with the region. The relationship did not end here, or the Chola influence did not end here. The Cholas not only dominated the strategic Malacca Strait, which is a choke point even today, right? Their naval presence extended into South China Sea as well, as far away as Philippines, then Papua New Guinea and the east coast of China. Till this region, the Cholas had extended their maritime influence. Around the same time, the contemporaries of Cholas were the Song dynasty, a major dominant empire in China. There are documented evidences of strong trading relations and very good diplomatic relations between the Cholas and the Song dynasty. That is something very interesting to learn. Right? Through the sea route, through Bay of Bengal, Malacca Strait and South China Sea, the Cholas and the Song dynasty were trading with each other. Right? Maritime trade was very dominant. They had very good diplomatic relations and naval ties as well. They would even take up joint naval missions to counter piracy, which had become a threat for their trade in the Malacca Strait. Back then near Singapore, in the Malacca Strait, piracy was a threat. Pirates would target these ships carrying precious goods and commodities. So piracy was threatening the maritime trade between the Cholas and the Song dynasty. So Cholas and the Song dynasty, they would collaborate. Their navies would work together to counter piracy, and they even shared naval technology, shipbuilding technology would be shared between them. That is the kind of historical close diplomatic ties that existed between these Indian and Chinese empires and civilizations. So if this could exist back then, when both were thriving and dominating civilizations of the region, why can't it exist today? That is the question, right? If the Indian empires had such vast influence, if the Chinese empires like the Song dynasty had tremendous influence all across Asia, and yet they were not fighting with each other, right? Throughout our 2000 years of history, there is a history of cooperation or at least friendly ties with each other. It's only in modern times that the present issues have come up. In fact, after India became independent and the Chinese Civil War came to an end, with the Maoists winning the war and establishing the People's Republic of China as a communist state, India, China, they did make an attempt to establish close friendly relations. Even though India was a democracy and China turned into a communist state under Maoist philosophy, both the countries, they did start out on a good note, trying to build a cordial relationship. In fact, India was one of the first countries in the world to recognize the PRC when it came to power. Right? Even though we were a democracy, we sympathized with the Chinese, the masses who had supported the Maoist rebellion. Right? We understood the farmers, the peasants, the workers, their sufferings. Even China had suffered a lot of colonial exploitation, very similar to India. Right? So we took sympathy with that. We backed the establishment of PRC by recognizing it and by establishing cordial ties with the PRC. We even established the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence in 1954, also popularly called the Panchsheel principles or the Panchsheel doctrine. It was championed by then Prime Minister Nehru with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. Because by 1950, tensions had come up in the relationship following China's annexation of Tibet. The PRC, inspired by the radical left-wing extremist ideology of Mao Zedong, would start displaying expansionist tendencies. It would try to expand its territory aggressively through violence and force. So as the PRC annexed Tibet in 1950, tensions did start between India and China. Right? India opposed the Tibetan annexation. India expressed sympathy with the Tibetan Buddhists, leading PRC to doubt India's intentions. Also, it was the Cold War era where all democracies were aligned together. So China assumed that India is an ally of Western countries. So suspicions and doubts came up in the relationship. And to address this, the Panchsheel principles were laid down to provide for stability in the relationship. Now, if you look at the Panchsheel principles, I want you guys to take this as an exercise. Please do a basic research about the Panchsheel principles. Read about the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Go through the 5 principles. You'll notice that it is rooted in the philosophy of Buddhism. It is directly inspired by a Buddhist philosophy. In fact, the Panchsheel, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, is a core tenet in the life of a Buddhist monk. A Buddhist monk follows these basic 5 principles so that he or she can peacefully coexist with others without bothering others, without troubling others, and resolving any disputes through talks and negotiations. That is the essence of the Panchsheel doctrine as well. If you look at the principles, you will see that India and China have committed to not meddle in each other's internal affairs. They promise to not allow their soil to be used against the other country. They promise to respect each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. They even promise to not get aggressive with each other, and even if there are disputes, they agree to settle them through talks and negotiations. Right? In fact, the Panchsheel, after it was adopted by India, China in 1954, it became globally popular. It became part of global diplomacy at a time when the world was divided between the 2 superpower blocs. Right? The Cold War had divided the world between the Western bloc led by US and the Eastern bloc led by Soviet Union. So in the middle of this, India, China in a way championed a third neutral ideology which promoted peaceful coexistence. China would adopt the Panchsheel principles in its relations with other countries. Even today, China's ties with Indonesia and few other Southeast Asian countries is based on the Panchsheel principles. It became one of the core philosophies that inspired the non-aligned movement, the NAM movement that was later championed by India. Right? It was even adopted by the UN General Assembly and by all the African Asian countries that attended the Afro-Asian Conference in 1950s. So Panchsheel principles, which is directly connected to Indian and Chinese civilizational history, became the driving philosophy of the global diplomatic agenda in 1950s. Right? But of course, what followed after this was a series of tensions, rivalries, and eventual conflict. Right? Especially China would start getting aggressive against India, escalate the border tensions, disputed the validity of the boundary lines, the British era boundary lines, leading to the 1962 conflict. China would capture Aksai Chin from India. Even today it is under China's illegal occupation, and it would raise claims over Arunachal Pradesh as well by referring to it as South Tibet. So from the western sector in the Ladakh region all the way till McMahon line in the eastern sector, China would turned this into a disputed border, increasing tensions and rivalries with India. So from 1950s to 1990s, as a result of the 1962 war and the border dispute, the relations were completely affected between the two sides, right? We saw a slight improvement for around 15 years. If you ask me if there has ever been any improvement in the relationship, has there ever been any stability or friendliness in the relationship, I would say it is between 1990s and 2010. For these 15 to 20 years, around 2 decades roughly, this is where close cordial ties existed between India, China, and even both the countries were cooperating in several areas of global diplomacy. But apart from that, after 2010, China has returned to its expansionist, aggressive behavior against India. And as India has gotten closer to the US, and as part of the increasing rivalries between China and US, China has been exerting more pressure on India, triggering frequent border incursions, disputes, and tensions, which leads to the current state we are in. Right? In the last 10-13 years, the relations have been completely destroyed, especially after the latest Ladakh clashes of 2020 and the Doklam dispute of 2017. Our ties have been completely derailed. Right? There is a lot of doubt and suspicion from both the sides. Our economic relationship is largely one-sided, right? And we fear that China is trying to encircle and contain India through its string of pearls strategy. We object the Belt and Road Initiative of China as it threatens India's sovereignty, because one of the projects of Belt and Road, the CPEC corridor, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it directly passes through POK, through Shaksgam Valley and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which are Indian territories occupied by Pakistan. Right? Shaksgam Valley was given away by Pakistan to China, an Indian territory occupied by Pakistan and leased to China later. So as the BRI threatens our integrity and sovereignty, we have boycotted the initiative. We see the BRI as a threat. We are concerned about China's encirclement of India, which is a reference to the so-called string of pearls strategy of China. So today the relationship is driven by fear, rivalry, tensions, conflict, and hatred, right? But there was a period where we did see an improvement in the relationship, and that's what I'm trying to point out. From 1990s to around 2010, for around 15 to 20 years roughly, right? There was a major improvement that we had noticed in the relationship. It all began in 1988 actually, when then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi carried out a historic visit to China in order to try and reset the relationship, which had been completely affected since the 1962 war. After the 1962 conflict, and after China captured Aksai-Chin, our relations had been completely affected. There were many other incursions and clashes in 70s and 80s as well. So for the first time in 1988, a fresh opening was created when Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited China. This was followed up by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, who paid an important visit in early 1990s. Following this, we started seeing close collaboration between India and China. It all began with a series of border agreements that were signed between India and China in the 1990s. That is in 1993 and in 1996. Two important border agreements were signed. The Peace and Tranquility Agreement along the line of actual control, and the agreement on CBMs, confidence building measures. The Peace and Tranquility Agreement along LAC and the confidence building measures. These boundary agreements between India and China played a critical role in reducing the tensions and the border conflicts, the border disputes between the two sides, because it created a mechanism to handle the incursions and the tensions that might arise because of the disputed nature of the border. Right? It established certain protocols which would be followed by both the sides, by the Indian Army and the People's Liberation Army. The whole focus of these agreements was to ensure that a local incursion or a local standoff doesn't escalate into a bigger conflict between the two armies. Right? So these agreements provided for a de-escalation, disengagement mechanism that provided for talks between military commanders so they could resolve the local issues at the local level without affecting the broader relationship. So these boundary agreements played an important role in bringing some stability into the relationship. It also helped in handling the border issues separately while focusing on other areas of cooperation, because economic ties had started booming by 1990s. In fact, this is what brought the two countries closer. I hope you know that by 1980s, China had opened up its economy. China had carried out massive economic cultural reforms, right, which led to the rapid rise of China. China quickly became a manufacturing powerhouse. It became a global hub for manufacturing and emerged as a fast-growing economy, as a large emerging economy. This was followed by India's LPG reforms in 1990s. After India faced the balance of payments crisis, then Finance Minister Manmohan Singh under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao initiated the landmark LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization and globalization. So as both India and China were globalizing their economy and opening up their sectors, right? China emerged as a manufacturing hub. India would also register tremendous growth, primarily driven by services, along with decent growth in agriculture and manufacturing. So the 1990s saw the rise of the Asian powers. The two Asian giants rose to power with their tremendous growth. They became the fastest growing economies in the world. So it was only natural for the two large growing economies to cooperate, to work together, because now we had common interests. We were finding a common ground. So this relationship, which was built on growing strong economic ties with normalization of the boundary issue, opened up many new opportunities. It was taken forward by the Vajpayee government in early 2000. Prime Minister Vajpayee would also pay an important visit to China, following which China recognized Sikkim as an integral part of India. Until early 2000, China never recognized Sikkim as a part of India, right? Even though Sikkim merged with India in 1970s, in 1975, China had not recognized the merger. Then we elevated our relations to the strategic partnership level. Our economic ties were booming and strategic ties developed. We even had close military relations as well. We even started a military exercise called Hand in Hand between Indian Army and the Chinese PLA. Then the special representative mechanism was established by 2003 to find a solution, a political solution to the boundary dispute. Both India and China would appoint their special representatives. From India, it would be the National Security Advisor. From China, it would be the State Counselor. These special representatives would try and find a political solution to permanently resolve the border dispute through talks and negotiations. So it was at this juncture, then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made a very important statement, a historic statement. So the efforts of previous governments were taken forward by the Manmohan Singh government post 2004-2005, and India and China were actually working together very closely. Between 2005 and 2009, there were many areas where India and China were cooperating with each other. In fact, as early as 1990s till 2005, we were working together at various multilateral platforms, right? We had common interests, common goals and objectives, and we were collaborating with each other. So then, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made a very big statement, a very important statement. He said that the world is large enough to accommodate the ambitions of both India and China. Because this was a period where, on one hand, India and China did have some kind of rivalries and tensions. And on the other hand, we were working together, cooperating together as well. So there was a dichotomy in the relationship. So when experts were questioning how India and China can work together, will the rise of India and China lead to a conflict in Asia? When such questions were being raised by Western countries especially, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made a very, very important statement. He said the world is large enough, there is enough space which can accommodate the ambitions of both India and China, meaning both India and China can thrive together. We can collaborate together. We need not be in conflict. We need not target each other. We can work together, help out each other, and ensure the stability of both the countries, right? So this, of course, was not a random statement. It was based on the historical ties between India and China. There is a history of tolerance between the two sides. As we discussed, even in ancient medieval times, the two large civilizations have always been friendly towards each other without major conflicts between them. So we need not allow the boundary issue, the modern issues to, affect and derail the larger relationship. To justify this argument, I'll give you some evidence as well. Look at the various multilateral platforms where India and China worked together from 1990s to 2010. During this 15-20 years period, we worked together at climate change negotiations at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We were part of the basic group that included Brazil, South Africa, India and China. These four emerging developing economies, they got together to push back against the developed countries which were refusing to take up historical responsibility for their historical emissions. The basic group of countries gave leadership to the developing underdeveloped countries, and we played a critical role in championing the Kyoto Protocol, the first climate change agreement before the Paris Agreement, and we enshrined the CBDR principle, the common but differentiated responsibilities principle. CBDR basically meant that the goal of fighting climate change is a common goal for everyone, for every country. But the responsibilities to be taken up will be different for each country depending on their historical emissions. Because developed countries have become developed as they freely burnt fossil fuels for 150, 200 years, since the days of the Industrial Revolution, right? So they are largely accountable for historical emissions, for the global warming that we are witnessing, right? So developing underdeveloped countries need not take up the same responsibility. Today, India, China might be the largest emitters, but our per capita emissions are extremely low even today. So India, China work together along with Brazil and South Africa and many other developing, underdeveloped countries. We even gave leadership to the G77 group and became leaders of the global South. And we championed the CBDR principle and enshrined it into Kyoto Protocol to ensure developed countries pay for historical emissions while giving more flexibility for developing and underdeveloped countries. We pushed for reforms of the global financial architecture, the World Bank and IMF, which were largely dominated by Western countries, by US and European Union. We kept pushing for the reforms of these financial institutions following the financial crisis of 1990s and 2000, right? In 1997, 98, and also in 2007, 2008, the world saw major economic crisis situations, which was not well handled by World Bank and IMF. So as emerging economies, India, China, along with others, gave a push for the reforms of World Bank and IMF. At platforms like WTO, the World Trade Organization, even here, we got together with other developing countries, gave leadership to all the global South countries, and countered the position of developed countries and took a common position. So these are various examples to show how India, China have actually worked together, collaborated together at various global multilateral platforms. So even today, these opportunities exist because even today there are several common interests and there is a deep-rooted historical relationship that we can always rely upon. In diplomacy, never dismiss the importance of civilizational ties. You can always rely upon it to build a stronger foundation for today's modern relationship. Today, India, China are the fastest and the largest developing emerging market economies. We both have a billion plus population. Cumulatively, we have around 3 billion plus population, right? We recently overtook China to become the world's most populous country. But for many more decades, we will continue to have a billion plus population. So with almost a third of humanity being represented in just two countries, it's all the more important for India, China to work together and collaborate. We're actually natural partners if you look at it. We have many similar objectives. We have a shared future, a shared destiny. So we need not be in conflict all the time. We need not just focus on the tensions, the rivalries, etc. There are opportunities available where we can actually work hand in hand, just like the military exercise which was named as hand in hand between India and China. There are many areas in global security, global development, where India, China can collaborate to create an open, inclusive society, to build peace and stability in the world, to avoid conflicts, to do away with imperial colonial policies which still affect the world. Right? You take the Israel-Palestine conflict, a direct outcome of colonial imperial policies. Right? We can push back against such biased narratives, create a new global order and provide for common prosperity. Right? All these opportunities exist, but of course, for this to happen, China's behavior has to change. China has to stop looking at India through the prism of the United States. India has gotten more closer to US and other countries primarily because of Chinese aggression, and it's not the other way around. It is China which has repeatedly triggered India by escalating the tensions, carrying out incursions and creating standoffs with India and threatening our integrity and sovereignty and capturing Indian territory. That is what is pushing India to seek support from other countries like Japan, Australia, European Union and the US. Right? India always follows the principle of strategic autonomy. Our foreign policy is always independent. Right? We balance different powers. We never side or align with any one single power block. We have never done that. The very foundation of our foreign policy is an independent, autonomous foreign policy. So China needs to understand that, needs to correct its approach towards India, and definitely I'm sure India will reciprocate as well. So you can say that there are definitely great opportunities available where we can collaborate even now. For example, at United Nations, to achieve sustainable development goals, to tackle climate change, right? To deal with disasters. Then through platforms like BRICS and SCO, where we are members, these multilateral groupings, right, can help us work in the region to promote regional cooperation and transform the global economy, global governance, and also the global security situation. India, China can actually work together to address the deficit, the global deficit that is affecting the economy, the security, and the governance situation, right? So that is something you need to be aware of, because you can expect a question or even an essay topic on these lines. All right. So with this, let's move on to the next article. We have actually two articles in today's newspaper referring to India's ties with Qatar. We actually discussed this yesterday. I gave you an idea as to what is happening, what is the big development, what options India has to deal with it. But let's take a look at these articles as well. It gives a greater insight into the current situation that has developed between India and Qatar. So we have an editorial on page number 8 and an article on page number 10. Both the articles are dealing with the arrest of former Indian naval soldiers in Qatar, which happened last year, right? Since then, these 8 Indian soldiers have been kept under detention, right? They've been kept under solitary confinement, and through a secret trial which was held just a couple of days ago, they have been delivered the death penalty by Qatar. Now, this came as a shocking development for India, right? Qatar has never made the charges public, so officially we don't know what the charges are. It has not informed the government of India as well. It has only given limited consular access as per the terms of the Vienna Convention. It has only allowed the Indian diplomats and consular officials in Qatar to meet the detained former Indian soldiers. All right, it has allowed them to talk to the family members as well for brief periods, but apart from that, Qatar has not been cooperative on the issue. It has not made the charges public, so clearly the indication is that this is likely to be a espionage case. That is what the charges, have been pressed by Qatar, right? Many media reports are indicating that Qatar's allegation is that these former Indian soldiers who were working for a company called Dhara Global, they were allegedly spying on Qatar's midget submarine. Qatar had recently procured a stealth midget submarine from Italy. And this company, Dhara Global, was working on the same project. It was training Qatar's Navy in operating the midget stealth submarine. This significantly boosted Qatar's naval maritime capabilities. And former Indian soldiers who were working for this security firm as defense trainers, consultants, etc., right? They were working on the same project. So according to media reports, the allegation is that these former Indian soldiers were apparently spying for Israel, passing on secret information about this midget stealth submarine of Qatar to Israeli intelligence agencies, most likely the Mossad. This is the allegation which is being rumored and reported. It's not confirmed. All right. There are reports indicating a possible collaboration between Israel and India, of India's RAW collaborating with Mossad and making use of former Indian soldiers to spy on Qatar's military equipment. These are the allegations which are being rumored and reported. But of course, there is no merit to it because officially there's nothing to confirm, or rather we can never confirm this as well. But at least Qatar needs to be more transparent and work with India to resolve the crisis, given that we actually share a friendly relationship. This actually poses one of the biggest tests and challenges for Indian diplomacy right now. Correct? Because ensuring the well-being of Indians everywhere in the world, right, is a top priority for India. It's one of our national interests. One of the core national interests of Indian foreign policy is to take care of the safety, the well-being of Indians around the world, right? And that too, these are former Indian soldiers of the Indian Navy. So it's very important to ensure they get justice. Now we can't dictate to Qatar as to why the charges have been filed, or to withdraw the case entirely. That can't be done. We can't interfere with their legal process. But however, we can seek a fair trial for them. We can seek a more transparent process where the charges are made public with the evidence. So India can provide the right legal aid, the right legal representation for the detained former Indian soldiers, right? And apart from that, we would like to see that the death penalty is revoked or not executed at any cost. And we would like to bring them back safely to India. These would be India's priorities. So this would definitely pose a test for our diplomacy, because India, Qatar are on the opposite sides of the ongoing conflict in West Asia. India has backed Israel with the right to defend itself against Hamas. We have criticized the terrorist attack of Hamas, backed Israel's right to defend itself. But however, we have taken a balanced stand on the Palestinian issue. India's ideological support to Palestine, to the two-state solution, always continues. This has been a regular feature of our Indian diplomacy. Irrespective of the ruling party and the governments, we've always supported the right of Palestinians to have their own country. So India has sent aid as well to Palestinians in Gaza who are affected by the war. And at the same time, we have supported Israel's right to act against terrorism and to target Hamas, which is a terrorist outfit. Now, this is where a difference comes up between India and Qatar. Qatar, of late, has been involved in backing several extremist terror organizations, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt. All these outfits are seen as terrorist organizations by Israel and most of the other countries, including all the Western countries. So Qatar has the habit of covertly sponsoring a war against Israel by sponsoring Hamas, Hezbollah, and Muslim Brotherhood. So this might, in a way affect the relationship right now, given the fact that the war has broken out. Following the terrorist attack of Hamas, Israel has launched these major strikes in Gaza Strip, which has triggered a humanitarian situation. So despite the balanced stand of India, Qatar and India may not be on the exact same page, because Qatar is involved in directly backing some of the extremist terror organizations. So this difference we have in West Asia might become one of the hurdles. That's why I told you it's a test for our diplomacy. But however, there is some good news. India does have significant leverage with Qatar. Qatar has been a good friend. We do share cordial relations otherwise. We actually have strategic defense cooperation agreements that have been signed, which could come as a leverage for India, which we could use to influence Qatar. India is one of the major purchasers of Qatar's energy exports. Almost 40% of our natural gas requirement is met from Qatar, right? So it's a very significant trading relationship. It's very crucial for India's energy security. And also this trade relationship fetches a lot of revenue for Qatar. So that itself is a leverage which could positively influence Qatar's government regarding this case. Plus, Qatar relies on India for some key imports. Several important food commodities, construction equipment, and many other raw materials are exported from India. And India happens to be the third largest source of imports for Qatar. So in a way, Qatar also has a dependency on India. It's not just India which is dependent on Qatar. So the point is, there is a strong economic relationship that binds the two countries together, and there is a very, very strong Indian community. In such a small country with a small population, almost 7 lakh of them are Indian members, Indian citizens and Indian workers. The Indian diaspora in Qatar is very, very strong, and they are the backbone of Qatar's economy. From oil industry, oil and gas industry, to hospitality, to real estate and construction, right? In all these sectors, even in IT, banking, Indian workers are critical. They are the backbone of Qatar's economy across various sectors and industries, and that makes, the Indian community a leverage for India. Recently, Qatar hosted the FIFA World Cup. Most of the infrastructure for the World Cup was built by Indian blue-collared manual workers. Right? India had a very big contribution to make in the complete transformation of Qatar. So we do have that leverage. And also, don't forget, when Qatar was boycotted by the Gulf countries in 2017, the Gulf Cooperation Council, led by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others, essentially all the Sunni Gulf countries, they had boycotted Qatar and placed a diplomatic blockade on Qatar because of the differences that had come up between them. Because Qatar was accused of sponsoring Hamas, Hezbollah and Muslim Brotherhood, as I told you. Now, this has not been the policy of the Sunni countries, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE. They had made their secret peace with Israel, right? They were no longer supporting such radical terror groups, based on the Palestinian issue. So since Qatar continued supporting these terror outfits against Israeli-American interests, Saudi Arabia, UAE, the leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council, they boycotted Qatar and imposed a diplomatic blockade on Qatar. Even Qatar's news channel, Al Jazeera, the very controversial news channel, it's a state broadcaster. It's owned by the Qatari kingdom, right? The Emir family, the royal family owns Al Jazeera. So Al Jazeera also has been heavily criticized for its biased reporting. So Israel, US and even Saudi Arabia, UAE, they've always criticized Al Jazeera for its biased reporting. Because of all these issues, Qatar was boycotted from GCC. A diplomatic blockade was placed on Qatar where all the other Gulf countries cut off their ties. They ended their diplomatic relationship. They shut off the borders as well. They ended all the flights, they shut down the roads, stopped all trade with Qatar, thus punishing Qatar severely in 2017. During this crisis, it was India which helped Qatar. India was one of the few countries which continued the close ties with Qatar, and it was crucial for Qatar to survive without the support from the Gulf countries. So this would have generated a lot of goodwill for India. Right? India did stand with Qatar. We balanced it out. While maintaining good ties with the Sunni Gulf countries, we maintained our ties with Qatar and continued our economic relations despite the economic blockade. So that would have generated a lot of goodwill. And you can actually see that in the goodwill shown by the Emir of Qatar towards India. I hope you know Qatar is a conservative authoritarian monarchy ruled by the royal family of the Emir. The Emir is the head of state and the head of government. So the Emir does share good ties with India. He has visited India as well. And Qatar and India have signed some very important agreements. For example, in 2008, a defense cooperation agreement was signed. We even have joint training exercises, training cooperation. In fact, Qatari military personnel, they train in Indian military academies. We give them a few slots in our defense institutions, from National Defense Academy to Indian Military Academy. Few slots are reserved for Qatari defense personnel where they are trained by Indian military officers. India is a major participant at the Doha International Maritime Defense Exhibition and Conference, which is held once in 2 years. It's a major maritime defense cooperation exhibition that is held by Qatar. And India is a big participant. The Indian Navy is a big participant. So we have a history of close defense military ties as well. And this gives us leverage to influence Qatar. And the best part is that in 2015, we have signed an agreement to transfer the sentenced prisoners from each other's countries. Since there are so many Indians in Qatar, many times they might get arrested for various crimes. So to ensure that they get a fair trial and fair justice, we have signed this agreement where after getting punished in Qatar, right, Qatar's legal system will deliver the punishment. But after that, the sentenced prisoners will be transferred to India, where they will serve the punishment in an Indian jail. And vice versa. If there are any Qatari citizens convicted in India, right, convicted by Indian courts, they will be sent back to Qatar to serve the sentence in Qatar's jails. So that way, the basic rights of the convicted persons can be protected, right? It's largely on humanitarian grounds. So this agreement is going to be critical right now. India needs to leverage its economic, defense and strategic ties, bring that diplomatic pressure on Qatar to ensure that this agreement is implemented. First of all, there is a death penalty. So India needs to work to ensure that this is pardoned. We need to apply for clemency. We need to work diplomatically, right? The government has to ensure that we engage in very quite subtle diplomacy. Diplomacy really happens behind the doors, not in front of the public, right? In the current Modi government, there has been an issue where there have been few motor mouths in the government who, promote jingoism on nationalistic lines and make these claims which in turn affect our ties with other countries, right? On these over ultra nationalistic lines, if certain leaders of the ruling party make such claims and if it has an impact on diplomatic relations, then everything would be lost. We have seen what has happened in India-Canada relations, the kind of statements that have come from India as well, right? So this is the time for quiet diplomacy. True diplomacy happens behind the scenes, right? Subtle diplomacy, professionals have to be allowed to work the channels and if required, the highest level intervention, be it the Prime Minister, National Security Advisor, the Foreign Minister. They need to get directly involved to work with Qatar and seek a royal pardon. This is absolutely critical. This is possible. The Emir of Qatar has the powers to pardon, right, any sentence. We need to appeal for clemency, get a commutation on the sentence, get the death penalty pardoned, right, and ensure that the Indian soldiers are returned. If required, we can agree to ensure that they serve the sentence in India, right, at least avoid the death penalty, bring them back as per the transfer of prisoners agreement, and ensure they serve the remainder of the sentence in an Indian jail, right, or seek a retrial, go for a judicial review. That's a legal option available apart from the diplomatic option. If all the options fail, then we can approach the International Court of Justice and the United Nations to seek justice for the former Indian soldiers. So both the articles are insisting that we should engage all the options, the diplomatic options as well as the legal judicial options. We could also work with countries like US, Saudi Arabia and UAE. They all have considerable influence in Qatar. So India can not only leverage its economic, defense and strategic relationship, right, and also the close ties we have with the Emir, but we also need to bring some influence from other countries, other powers that have leverage on Qatar, to ensure that they are pardoned completely, or at least the death penalty is removed and they are transferred to India to serve the remainder of the sentence in India. If everything fails, then we need to explore the judicial legal options, mainly at the ICJ, right, to get a stay order against the death penalty and ensure a fair trial is provided to the former Indian soldiers. So this is going to be a very, very important issue as it concerns the well-being of Indian diaspora and our important diplomatic ties in West Asia. The topic is going to be very, very important. Now, coming to the next column. On page number 8, we have a column written by Arun Maira, a top Indian policy thinker and a civil society activist. Right? He has previously contributed to government policy making as well. But now, he talks about the role of women in the economy, the role of women in promoting social development. Now, this is something we've been discussing from quite a few days, right? In the last 3-4 days itself, we have had a couple of such discussions talking about the role of women in the economy, in the labor force. Now, this topic is making a lot of news because of the recent Nobel Prize in Economics. Now, if you look at the Nobel Prize in Economics, this has been largely dominated by male economists. Almost 90 men have won the Nobel in Economics since 1969, whereas only 3 women have been recognized with the Nobel Prize in Economics. Now, this is a big disparity. It highlights the gender disparity. The writer is focusing on this. He's saying that there is a big discrimination against women as far as their role is concerned in economic growth and development. This is the focus of the column. The writer says, in a male-dominated world, the role of women in driving economic growth, the role of women in policy making, the role of women in promoting socio-economic development has been largely neglected and ignored. This is very evident by looking at the Nobel Prize in Economics. He says that is an indicator. So the writer says it's very important to adopt a paradigm shift in our governance, in our economic model in India and around the world to ensure that women are given a leadership role, that women lead from the front to drive our economic growth and socio-economic development, because they do have the ability to bring about that transformational change. The writer points out how Elinor Ostrom was the first woman who won the prize in 2009, mainly for her work on how local communities led by women play a role in developing countries in improving local governance. She focused on decentralization, how in developing nations, local village level communities led by women leaders can transform the local economy. Then Esther Duflo, the second woman to win the Nobel Economic Prize in 2019, she was recognized for her work in elevating global poverty. Even in her work, women were given a primary role. She recognized the role of women in tackling poverty, right? Because as women participate more in economic activities, as their contribution is more recognized, right, it allows for transformation of the society and the family as well. Women as decision makers at the household level play a critical role in ensuring better nutrition, better education and health for their children and for the whole family. This leads to overall transformation. The latest Nobel laureate in economics, Claudia Goldin, she was awarded for her tremendous work in highlighting how women are facing gender disparity in the labor market. Women's participation in labor force has gone down because there is a tremendous social pressure on them. The institution of marriage, the familial pressure, the societal pressure is pushing women to stay out of the workforce, and even if they work, even if they do the same work, they will not get the same pay and same recognition and same career progression as men. This is very clearly established with evidence by Claudia Goldin, that even if women take up the same career, do the same amount of work, even if they're as talented as men, they will get lesser pay. This is established around the world. Right? And first of all, women are discouraged from entering the workforce, especially post-marriage, because of familial obligations, societal obligations, and the stigma around it, which is also a result of a patriarchal society where there is a lot of gender disparity. Right? Women are in general discouraged from entering the workforce, and even if they enter, they are not paid equally. Right? So this clearly brings up the role of women in economic development. Claudia Goldin has established through her studies that women are earning lesser money than men for the same work they are doing. Right? Women are contributing to the family as well, which is largely going unrecognized. Apart from the injustice happening in terms of pay, in terms of remuneration, right, with regard to their professional work, even in the family, their contribution to the family and society is not being recognized. The housekeeping work that women do, right, raising a child, the household chores, which entirely falls on women in patriarchal societies where men don't contribute enough, right? It is critical for overall human well-being in the society, and also this contribution of women is not even accounted in the economy, in the GDP, right? It doesn't take into account this work, the household work being done by women, which is phenomenal, which is critical for the family's well-being and survival, is not accounted for. So this unfairness is being brought out, where patriarchal societies discourage men from contributing to household work, whereas placing the entire burden on women, from cooking to cleaning to raising the child. Correct? The whole family doesn't contribute to it, but the burden largely falls on women. This is the general observation around the world, not just in developing countries, even in developed countries. So this is something that Claudia Goldin brings out, and she points out that women actually play a critical role in the care that they provide. The caring work that they carry out in raising a child, in looking after the family, right? It is actually a key part of the economy. Even though we don't account for it, women are actually working full time, right? And the problem is, even if they seek out employment, let's say they want to try out a job, while managing the family obligations, they face discrimination by the employers. Because employers have a stereotype that women won't be able to balance their family commitments with work. They feel women may not completely contribute or dedicate themselves to the job. So that is why they end up getting the bad end of the deal in terms of jobs and in terms of pay compared to men. Right? So this is a vicious cycle which has been created. So to break this, the writer is suggesting that we should understand the role of women in the labor market. We need to encourage greater labor force participation of women. Now please understand, the global economy is undergoing a pattern shift. There is a major shift happening where the formal economy is actually declining. Because of the economic crisis, slowdown in economic growth, industrialization is slowing down, right? Both manufacturing and services are slowing down. The formal sector where employment is generated is slowing down. So there are fewer jobs available in your formal traditional markets. And there is more employment happening in the informal sector and in the gig economy, which has come up with the evolution of mobile phones and internet. In this economy, where large number of people are getting employment in the informal sector, in the gig sector, it's all the more important to protect women and allow women to make a bigger contribution to economic growth and development. The writer says, in the Indian context, if you look at our human development, it's quite below average. We are ranked 132 out of 191 countries on the HDI index, which is brought out by the UN Development Program. So clearly, there is a lot more that India can do in terms of improving human development. Human development is tied to education, better healthcare, better standard of living. The writer says, what better way to improve human development than investing in caregiving services? Indian women are already playing a critical role in caregiving domestic services, which is not even being valued in the market economy. Right? You look at Asha workers, the Anganwadi workers. They are paid very meager amounts of money. It is almost negligible. But the work they are doing is tremendous. They are contributing to women's health, looking after pregnant women, contributing to infant health care, improving their nutrition levels, their health status, ensuring they get vaccinated. Such a critical role is being played by women workers, that is Asha workers and Anganwadi workers, and yet they are paid meager sums. That's because we don't value caregiving work. There is no market value attached to it. Is that clear? The writer says that even with regard to our sustainable development goals, as a world we are failing. We are not achieving inclusive sustainable growth, and the G20 summit proved we are off track from the global targets, the SDG targets, which we are supposed to achieve by the end of the decade, by 2030. Be it elevating poverty or tackling hunger, providing better education, healthcare, in all the targets, we are off the mark by a very big margin. In hardly around 12% of the targets, we are on track. In rest of them, we are completely off track. That's because women are not playing a bigger role in development. Rather, they are already playing a role, it's not being recognized. The caregiving work is not being compensated adequately. Right? They face discrimination in the formal industry, where employers hesitate from hiring women. Right? Even if they hire, they give them jobs which don't match their skills, or they give them lower pay compared to men who are doing the same work. Right? This is because of gender stereotyping. Plus, there is the constant family pressure, the social pressure, which keeps women out of the workforce, or even if they are part of it, they are not contributing fully because of these social factors. So that is why the writer is saying there is an immediate need to change our approach. We need to carry out a paradigm shift, a transformative change in our approach. The writer says the time has come for women-led, women-centric approach to development. Because in today's economy and today's model of growth and development is completely driven by men, by a male-dominated world order. He says that the masculine view of economy is largely based on the profit motive. That is the reason why there is intense competition, right? Instead of cooperation, instead of showing care towards each other, the whole global economic developmental model is based on competition, as it's largely a profit-driven model pushed by the masculine view of the economy. No wonder caregiving and domestic work is not valued in market economy. Caregiving and domestic work is not valued in the market economy. Correct? Whereas if you look at the feminine centric view of the economy, it is built on the concept of humans caring for each other. This natural maternal instinct of women can be imbibed into the economy and developmental approach as well. And that is the paradigm shift the writer is talking about. He says that in an economy dominated by men, we are seeing a tragedy of the commons, where everyone is suffering because of the profit motive, because of the lack of inclusiveness and sustainability. Instead, if you provide for a women-led, women-centric approach, where cooperation becomes the norm, equity, sustainability becomes the norm, then it will become promise of the commons. So that is why he is calling upon Elinor Ostrom's work, which won her the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009, to be relied upon to use local communities to drive this approach, where women will be at the center of this developmental approach. That is, at the level of your village councils, your panchayats, women-led leadership should be provided for local community governance, which will transform the local economy and local development. Right? So that is what the writer is calling for, a paradigm shift in our view of the economy, where we don't value caregiving, household work. If women are compensated, paid for this, if they are not stereotyped in the labor market, given jobs according to their skills and pay according to their skills, without discrimination between men and women, right? It will transform the whole nature of the global economy, and women in leadership roles can drive a more care-based approach instead of a competitive approach. Is that clear? So I think this is a very, very important argument the writer is making, and it's very important from governance and social issues point of view. Again, even for your essay, it could be very, very important. Now, with this, I complete the detailed discussion of all the big mains articles. Now, let's take a quick look at the prelims articles. We have an article on page number 1 that refers to parliamentary standing committees. The article is referring to the new bills the government is pushing through to replace the colonial era criminal laws in the country. Right? Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Procedure Code and Indian Evidence Act, which are colonial laws, which are outdated, they are being replaced with the new versions of the bill, the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, and the Bharatiya Sakshya Sanhita of 2023. These are the new laws being proposed, right? So these bills have been introduced in the parliament by the government, and accordingly they are being examined by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs. So the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs, which reviewed these bills, was about to submit a report, but it has been opposed by opposition parties, because opposition parties have raised a concern that the Parliamentary Standing Committee is rushing through the review work. As it is dominated by members of the ruling party, the BJP, there is an allegation from opposition leaders who are also part of the standing committee that the report is being rushed through. A thorough, careful review is not being done, and without a proper examination, they are pushing through the bill in the parliament. So because of this accusation from opposition leaders, the Parliamentary Standing Committee has held back on submitting its report on these new bills. Is that clear? So from here, there is something very important you can understand for your prelims. You can understand what are parliamentary committees and what is their role, what is their significance. The Parliamentary Standing Committees, constituted by the Speaker or the Chairman of the House, respectively in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, it allows for greater scrutiny and accountability of the government. In fact, these parliamentary committees are established based on the powers of Article 105 and Article 118 of the Indian Constitution. Article 105 deals with privileges, parliamentary privileges of the MPs. 118 deals with the powers of the House of the Parliament to make rules for regulations and for transaction of business, conduct of business in the House. So based on these constitutional powers, the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, right, that is the vice president, then the Speaker of the Lok Sabha can constitute these parliamentary standing committees, which provide for delegation. Whenever bills are introduced, whenever a policy matter comes up for debate in the House, it can be pushed to the standing committees for a thorough review, a greater scrutiny, which provides for greater accountability in the legislative process. Is that clear? Instead of government simply pushing through the bills in the parliament through its brute majority, because governments will obviously have majority in the legislature, to ensure that there is a thorough review of every bill, every policy being proposed, being pushed through, these parliamentary committees are set up. They actually take up the review work, right? They reduce the load on the parliament as well. They provide for more expertise. They can bring in more expertise in reviewing bills and policies. And as it consists of a mix of MPs from ruling party and opposition parties, it also provides for consensual decision making. It provides for building political consensus between various parties. So ruling party simply cannot bulldoze through the parliament, pass any law it wants. So it's a system of checks and balance as well in the parliamentary legislative process. And there are two types of such standing committees which can be constituted. You have your permanent standing committees, the parliamentary standing committees, and the ad hoc committees. As the name itself tells you, ad hoc committees are for short duration to look at a particular issue. Standing committees are more permanent, they are regular feature. So the chairperson of the house can set up such committees, and we have many parliamentary committees like all your important finance related committees. The estimates committee, the public accounts committee or the PAC, these are two of the most powerful parliamentary committees, right? So please understand their tenure, how the members, the MPs are, appointed into the committees, either they are elected or nominated, and what is the strength. There are 30 members here from Lok Sabha in your estimates committee for a term of 1 year who are elected. Then you have 22 members elected from both houses for your PAC, Public Accounts Committee, which keeps a check on public spending and finances. 15 MPs from Lok Sabha, 7 from Rajya Sabha. Then the Committee on PSUs, the Public Sector Undertakings, which review the functioning of PSUs. Again, 22 members, 15 from Lok Sabha, 7 from Rajya Sabha, elected for 1-year term from both houses. Like this, there are many other parliamentary standing committees. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs, on Education, Foreign Affairs, etc. So please take a look at this. Try to put in a little more effort to read about parliamentary committees, understand what other standing committees and ad hoc committees are present and what's their role and what is the significance. Next, on the same page, on the front page, we have an article referring to something called dark pattern and interface interference. Two very, very important terms have been used here. Now, you might have seen if you're booking an airline ticket, let's say you log into the application of Indigo Airlines or Vistara, or you're using apps like, Make My Trip, Booking.com, etc. You see that on these online platforms, when you're booking your ticket, right, you confirm your ticket, and then when you're about to make the payment, you're taken to a page where you're given the option to select your seat. You're asked to select your food preferences, your baggage preference. But these pages are designed in such a way that it appears as if you don't have a choice other than paying extra for it. Right? They'll show the entire layout of the aircraft after you proceed with the booking, giving you an impression that there is no free seat available at all, because free seats will not be highlighted. They will only highlight the paid seats where you have to pay a premium to access the seats that are shown. Now, this is a trick. The users are actually being tricked and deceived. There are free seats available. If you don't select a seat right now at the booking stage, later, the rule is that it will auto-assign. Free seats will be automatically assigned to you. But since the design of the page is deceiving in nature, it is designed to trick the users, you believe that you need to pay the premium to get the premium seat. Right? The skip button will be hidden somewhere in the corner. Same with adding baggage and even food. The whole design itself is deceiving. You're tricked to believe that you need to select all these features. So basically, users are being tricked by the airlines and by the online booking platforms to purchase more, to make more purchases which they don't intend to do. This pattern of pushing customers to buy something they don't want is called the dark pattern. It's an unfair trading practice which is categorized as a cybercrime under the IT Act, the Information Technology Act. It's a fraudulent practice. It accounts for a e-commerce fraud, right? So many airlines are resorting to the technique where they're nudging the customer. They're giving a slight nudge through their deceptive design of the page, where you're pushed to buy their products which you don't want actually. No one wants a premium seat unless you really want to purchase that. You're happy with a free seat, but the design is such that you think there are no free seats available and you're tricked into buying it, right? But the skip button is hidden there. If you skip the page, you will still get an automatically assigned seat later at the time of your check-in. But users are not being informed about it. So such deceptive design is called interface interference. In the interface, in the user interface, in the UI, right? A deliberate interference is created with the design elements so that you're tricked into purchasing something you don't want, which is called the dark pattern. All right. So this constitutes a cybercrime, and hence the regulator is acting against these companies. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, they have directed the airlines and the booking platforms to not use dark patterns and interface interference to deceive their customers, because that is an unfair trading practice. If they continue doing it, cybercrime cases can be filed against them. All right. Next, another important article on page 10. Pakistan has broken the ceasefire. Back in 2003, India-Pakistan had agreed to uphold the ceasefire they had committed to in 1949 under the Karachi Agreement after the India-Pakistan War, the first 1947-1948 war. This ceasefire had been held for several years, and in 2021, both India-Pakistan reiterated their commitment to uphold the ceasefire in order to reduce the tensions between them. Because by 2020, tensions had increased between India-Pakistan after Pulwama attacks and the Balkot airstrikes. So in 2021, India-Pakistan had reiterated that they will uphold the ceasefire. They will not open fire across the disputed border, that is across the line of control in Kashmir, in the Jammu and Kashmir sector. But in the last few weeks, we are noticing a disturbing pattern where Pakistani Rangers, the border guarding force of Pakistan, they are deliberately opening fire, that too large-scale indiscriminate firing. They have fired shells and mortars as well, along with indiscriminate automatic firing. They are using automatic weapons along with shells and mortars, targeting some of the villages in the Jammu and Kashmir sector, specifically in the Arnia sector towards Jammu, even towards Rajouri and the Anantnag region, right along the LOC. Such deliberate acts have been noticed, and the other day, almost for 8 hours throughout the night, intense shelling and firing has been carried out by the Pakistani Rangers, targeting the BSF, which is India's border guarding force along the Pakistani border. A BSF Jawan has been injured as well. Now, this is a disturbing development because in the last few weeks, we have noticed an increase in attempt to infiltrate terrorists into India. Terrorist infiltration has gone up all of a sudden from across the LOC. Right? We have seen several incidents where even Indian soldiers have been killed and martyred, and Indian Army has managed to neutralize several terrorists as well who have sneaked in across the LOC. Now, this is a deceptive pattern Pakistan has always used. It deliberately breaks the ceasefire and opens fire on Indian positions during night time to create a distraction, so that during the night cover of the night and the firing which is going on, the terrorists who are trained by Pakistan, they'll sneak across the LOC and enter into India to plan and carry out attacks in India. So this pattern has again been noticed. In the last few weeks especially, there is an increase in infiltration attempts. Several terrorists have infiltrated as well, some have been neutralized, but Pakistan's deliberate opening of fire is deliberate act of giving cover for the terrorists who are sneaking through. Alright, so it points towards possible major attacks coming either in Jammu and Kashmir or maybe in other parts of India. Because in Pakistan as well, internally, a lot of changes are happening. Nawaz Sharif, the former Prime Minister who had been exiled, has been brought back into Pakistan's politics. This wouldn't have happened without the blessing of the Pakistani army and the ISI. So in the upcoming elections, there is clearly a nexus which is developing between the army, ISI and the Nawaz Sharif election campaign, right? So these internal political and even the economic developments happening could have something to do with the increased security threats for India. We have seen quite often that whenever such internal challenges are present, when internal changes are happening in Pakistan, the army ISI often use terrorism to target India, to raise tensions with India. Right? So India should be prepared for what is going to come. Maybe more unrest in Kashmir, maybe some major terror attack, because these are deliberate acts where the ceasefire is being deliberately broken multiple times, and we are seeing active infiltration attempts from across the border. Next, on page 12, we have an article that refers to the India Mobile Congress. The India Mobile Congress. Please make a note of this. Prime Minister Modi has inaugurated the India Mobile Congress, which is Asia's largest digital conclave. It's a conclave of all mobile manufacturers, cell phone service providers, telecom internet service providers, etc. So it is organized by, this conclave is organized by the Cellular Operators Association of India along with Department of Telecommunications from the Ministry of Communications. This is considered as Asia's biggest technology communication conclave, right? This is the 7th edition of it. So during this inauguration, PM Modi has pointed out the advances India has made in the telecom sector. He has said 80% of Indians in urban areas have access to high-speed internet, which has transformed our economy. He has pointed out India's rollout of 5G networks successfully across the country and how India is going to emerge as a leader in 6G networks as well. He's also pointed out India's growing profile as a mobile manufacturer. Today we are one of the top mobile manufacturing countries, right? From an importing country, we are becoming a self-sufficient country which is also exporting mobile phones produced in India. So he's pointed out to this transformation happening in the mobile communication industry at the India Mobile Congress, which is jointly organized by the Government of India. It's a major digital communication conclave organized by Department of Telecommunication. Coming to the last article today, it refers to the ethnic divisions in Myanmar. The article points to an alliance of ethnic rebel groups in northern Myanmar which have launched a series of attacks against Myanmar's military rule. As you know, Myanmar has now been brought under military junta since 2021. Myanmar's armed forces have taken control after toppling the civilian government and nullifying the elections in 2021. Since then, the military junta is being targeted by various rebel factions that have joined with the pro-democracy forces in Myanmar. Because Myanmar's military junta is targeting innocent civilians. It is crushing protesters, committing brutal violations of human rights. So Myanmar has always seen these ethnic divisions because Myanmar, just like Northeast India, is an ethnically diverse region. There are many ethnic tribal groups that inhabit the country, right? For example, you have the Shan community, the Kachins, apart from Rohingyas, the Chins, etc. So you should have a fair idea about these major communities in Myanmar and how this creates a base for insurgency in Myanmar and how it is connected to India. Is that clear? Now I'm sure all of you would have heard about Rohingyas, the ethnic Muslim minorities in Rakhine state over here, who have been targeted by Myanmar's military and the radical Buddhists, right, leading to almost genocide against Rohingya minorities. This has led few radical Rohingyas to form their own terror outfit called the Arakan Army, referred to as the Arakan Army or ARSA, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. It's one of the major violent armed groups in the region that targets the military junta. Then in the Kachin region in northern Myanmar, over here towards the Chinese border, this is where you find the Kachin community. They have been fighting an insurgency against Myanmar since decades through the Kachin Independence Army. It's one of the major rebel groups in Myanmar. All right. Then in the Shan state, you can see the Shan region as well here, where the Shan ethnic community in this particular region, right, in these areas, you can see here, this is inhabited by the Shan community. You can see the color coded index that helps you understand where the Shan community is found. So even they have a rebellion against the military rule and they have been leading an insurgent war since many decades against Myanmar. Now these are the groups which have united to form an alliance. The Rohingya outfits, the Kachin outfits and the Shan rebel groups. So together they have launched a collective rebellion against Myanmar's military junta. This is part of the ongoing civil war in the country. The other major groups present here even include the NSCN Kaplang, which is a northeast insurgent outfit that targets India. All right? Because Nagas found in India have connections on the other side in Myanmar. There are Nagas found in Myanmar as well. So this terror outfit, NSCN Kaplang, it's a northeast insurgent group recognized as a terrorist group in India. It has a presence here along the India-Myanmar border and it keeps carrying out attacks against India by finding a base in the border areas. Apparently it gets support from China as well. China wages this covert war against India by backing some of the northeast insurgent groups. Right? You can see the Chin community as well, found right across the border areas over here. The Chins, as you know, are connected with the Kuki and the Mizo community in Manipur and Mizoram, which is also tied to the ongoing ethnic violence in Manipur. So you should have this basic idea about the different ethnic groups and insurgencies in Myanmar and how it becomes a shelter for northeast insurgents and how it creates security challenges for India. Right? That is the basic awareness you need to have. So with this, I would like to complete my discussion for today. Please take up the 2 questions for mains answer writing practice. Post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link is given in the description box below. So on this note, I would like to conclude the discussion. I hope you guys have liked it. Do press the like button. Let us know in the comments how it went and do subscribe to the channel and also head to the Telegram channel because we have a quiz on these topics. The link for Telegram channel also is in the description box below. So that's it for today. See you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.